welcome to the Tune In Radio U podcast. I am your host, Ruth, and with me today I have the absolute legend, kick-ass coach, that is Yasmin Eve. She is a trauma-informed coach and breathwork facilitator, as well as being part owner in Cacao Collective, a ceremonial grade cacao company. Yaz, welcome.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be on my podcast. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Yes. First and foremost, I get the really serious stuff out the way first, because that is how I roll. What is it that you like to do for fun?
So for me, my favorite thing to do is I'm a lover of music. So anything gig related, drum and bass, house music, I'm there. I'm on the D floor. I'm carving it up. It's my absolute favorite thing to do for fun. So that's me.
Amazing. I heard I heard and I've seen that you're getting into the whole DJ scene as well now.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wouldn't really say I'm getting into the scene just yet. It's definitely a dream though. But yeah, given that I've always loved electronic music and music in general, played music from like really, really young, all the way through my school years. So I kind of had a break from playing any music for like 5 years, which was really unheard of for me. I went from almost being like professional trumpet player to then not playing music at all. So I honestly wanted to do DJing for like 3 years. And last year I just finally went, you know what? I've got nothing stopping me. I'm going to do this. And I'd heard that there was a school in Perth doing DJ lessons. And I was like, hell yeah, sign me up. So I did 10 weeks there with an incredible teacher called Paulo. Shout out to Paulo, Lab 6. And that was way harder than I thought, actually, to begin with, because I was going in like, this is going to be easy, this is going to be so much fun, only to realize that it's actually a little bit more technical than I had thought. But once I got the hang of it, like, it's honestly, it's a big hobby of mine. So I definitely do that a lot in my spare time. And I did have my first gig at a boat party recently, which was amazing. And it's definitely something I want to make more space for later in the year, for sure.
All right, peeps, you heard it first. If you want DJ Yaz on your bill, hit her up.
Hit me up if you have a party or an event. Ruth, if you need a DJ for your next event.
Hey.
I'm your gal.
Cacao/DJ. Love it. Yes.
I know.
All right, I'll talk to you after, man. All right. So, as you know, I've got a Patreon page for my podcast, and on one of the membership tiers for my subscribers, the people on this particular membership tier have the option of asking questions to future guests through myself. And I've got a question here by the wonderful Michelle. Are you cool if I just ask away? Yeah, cool. So Michelle said this. I'd really love a basic, straight to the point meaning on what the inner child is and why work around this is so important. Does it hit on the very reason why we react/feel a certain way in situations? As an example, for as long as I can remember, I've just apologized for everything. I'm just sorry that I'm over here doing my thing, breathing. I have no idea why this is such an automatic response for me to everything, good, bad, otherwise. But I've been told inner child work is probably something I should/need to focus on next, which is awesome. Just not 100% sure what I should be looking for. Over to you, Yaz.
Ooh, powerful question, Michelle. That is it's a very dense question in a good way. I'm really impressed by that question. And I'm going to do my best to answer it simply. But like I was saying to you, Ruth, before, there's like this beautiful dance between the simplicity of this work, especially personal development, self-healing, all of that. There is a simplicity in what it is that you need to do. But there's also this complexity to it in that I guess healing really is about, it's a layered journey. So there's always layers to this. There's nuances. There's crevices and corners and bits that you still might not be aware of. And as you go on your journey, you're going to find out more and more and more. And I think sometimes that's what makes it feel kind of complex, because it's like, oh, but I thought I just needed to do this one thing and then everything would be sorted and I would never have to look at that again. And I think the irony of this journey is really like, it's like almost a lifelong journey, not in a bad way, but more in the way of you are constantly going to be presented with new opportunities for healing in the best possible ways, and new opportunities to know yourself on deeper levels each time that those sorts of things present themselves in your life. So I really wanted to just share that, number one, because there is some complexity to this work, number one. And I definitely want to just celebrate your vulnerability and your courage to ask that question, to put it out there, and to even want to investigate this area of, you know, healing work. I think it's really amazing. So thank you, Michelle. What is the inner child? To keep it really simple and to the point for you, and for the listeners here, I guess we could really look at the inner child as being like the original essential self, but also like the first aspect of you that experienced trauma or wounding um, as a human being on planet Earth. So, if we really want to take it all the way back, you know, birth is actually an extremely traumatic event for all parties involved, even for the baby. So, when we look at infant trauma, like that actually begins at birth for everyone. And there is a lot in that realm. I'm not really specified in that realm, but I wanted to just highlight that there's also, it goes right back to birth. We can even say that there's even been new modalities and theories and even studies that have really shown that there are effects of just being in the womb. So pre-birth, there is also an effect that it can have on the fetus and the baby. So when we talk about like the inner child, it's really just the aspect of your psyche, or the aspect of you and the self that was the original part of you that was probably wounded first. And it does set the stage for a lot of our adult experiences, and perhaps wounding or traumas that we then go through later in life. Again, I believe that everything becomes an opportunity for us as well. So when we look at the child self and what happened in that scenario, and then we look at the adult life, often there are some real themes and similarities in that, but I'll get to that in a moment. So the inner child is really the part of you that perhaps hasn't processed the stuff that actually happened at that age. Because think about it, from 0 to 7, you're in what's called like theta state, which is really what we do when we go into a hypnosis, we go into a deep meditation. It's a very suggestible time, and it's a very, when they say that term, children are like a sponge, they just absorb everything.
Yeah.
That's because your mind and your neurology is set up so that you can absorb as much information as possible to evolve as quickly as you can to become an independent being. And when we look at human, human babies, we are the most dependent infants on the planet, as opposed to all other species. We're the most dependent. So I feel like that's already setting us up for some interesting like adventures within that, because we're solely reliant on our parents to provide our core needs until we're like about 7, and even beyond then, really till we're like 18. So our journey is really about this whole idea that your needs are for love, unconditional love, and safety, and all of those sorts of things. And often what can happen is, think about your parents. So your parents have all their own stuff, their own conditioning, their own past traumas and woundings. They've had their own childhood with their parents. And so a lot of the time, our parents are also on their own journey, and they're perhaps projecting their own stuff onto the babies or onto us as children. They're projecting their own fears, their own beliefs, their own insecurities, their own self-worth stuff. Like that always tends to get projected on us as children. especially in that time of 0 to 7, and you're going to take on everything because guess what? Your parents and immediate family are like the only representation of the world you have. So whatever happens in that space, you believe to be true. You don't really question it. And you also then create this elaborate belief that that's actually how the world is. So it paints this picture, like your childhood painted the picture for the world at large, even though like that's not really the truth often, right? So for instance, if your parent at that time said Santa was real when you were a child, you're going to believe that. What other evidence do you have to support that it's not true? You don't have the conscious faculty to decide beliefs either at that age. So think about all the things that your parents might have told you or taught you or said to you as a child that you couldn't go, oh, well, I don't know if that's true, Karen. You're just going, yeah, that's the truth because mum said, right? I remember saying that at school, like to kids, well, my mum said this, so it's the truth. And she's like, God, basically, and everything she says is gospel. And so I think that's what plays into our conditioning. And I think that's what then begins to shape perhaps our insecurities or our wounds, issues like that. So, for instance, if you had a very judgmental family or a very harsh mother who wasn't very affectionate towards you as a child, or perhaps didn't know how to really love you because maybe she didn't know how to love herself and her mother didn't give her a lot of love, then you might find that you have formed maybe some sort of wounding around the feminine and women, but also this abandonment wound and attachment wound there. So there are so many layers to the inner child work. That's why I'm saying it's simple, but it's also complex because within the range of the inner child, there's also like subcategories, which is really fun. But I hope that information kind of gives you that understanding. And when we talk about, what sets the tone for our beliefs, our insecurities, or whatever, we're then going out into the world and we're often still living that reality through maybe a more grown up eye, right? I'm here, me now, but have my beliefs or conditions really changed since 7 years old? Maybe not, because we're often still acting out from that place and still trying to um, confirm a lot of those beliefs because that's what the role of the mind is, right? And the ego. How can I confirm my reality? How can I confirm that I'm right? Because being right is safe. So that's that piece. But I just want to go to the other parts of this question, Ruth, if you wouldn't mind kind of telling me the second part of that question after what is
Sure,
the inner child?
sure. So she goes on to say the example that she gives was that
Mm.
for as long as she can remember, she's apologized for everything,
Okay. Yeah.
basically.
So when we think about like, is that why we're so reactive? Because remember, that was also a piece of the question, Michelle. Yes and no, right? Because yes, you're going to have some conditioning and some essential, wounding from 0 to 7 and in your childhood and the way your parents were towards you. But then you've also got life after that, and that still does play a part in certain things, especially when we look at trauma and the way that the nervous system gets activated. You could have very well experienced a trauma at 13 or 16 or 20 that could then affect the way you react to your world after that point. So I'm not going to say it's just because of childhood and the inner child doing everything, but I would say the inner child does play a part. And I like to say sometimes we're all just little children, little wounded children acting in adult bodies a lot of the time until we really address that stuff. So if you've ever noticed yourself saying, you're acting like a child right now, it could be a beautiful cue to go, wait, maybe this is coming from the inner child and not the adult part of me today. So just wanted to add that piece. But when it comes to feeling like you've always apologized throughout your whole life from, as long as you can remember, that sounds to me like, yeah, maybe that did belong from, that came from your childhood, because when it's as long as I can remember, that usually states that I can't look further back than my childhood at some point. And I would say, yeah, that might be something to look at in terms of your childhood. And I would even suggest inquiring about perhaps the way that your parents interacted with you at a young age. When you're apologizing for things, it's either because we're having a lot of criticism and judgment, and like this, maybe your parents were very much perfectionists or controlling, or I mean, I'm just throwing out some ideas here, might not be the the truth. But, there could be that notion. So around a lot of judgment and criticism, maybe that was the family dynamic, then it's often that we feel like we have to keep apologizing for ourselves because we're not perfect, we're not enough. Everything I do is not okay. Or it could be that, maybe you just noticed that you were always told off a lot as a child, like everything you did was just a problem. And perhaps your parents just didn't have the capacity to support you as an infant or you just being a child, which makes mistakes, which makes a mess, which does all this stuff, which is normal. But sometimes, our parents don't necessarily always have the capacity to support and nurture the growth of a child because they've got their own stresses and lives. So I would actually look to what was happening in my life as a child. What were my parents like as a child? And when I ask people this when we first do inner child work, it's really funny because a lot of people get quite defensive and almost there's like this taboo around saying that your parents were shit. And it's not that they need to be terrible parents to have maybe affected you or impacted you in a way that you might still be struggling with today. And that's of no one's fault. It just is, right? Our parents did the best they could with what they had, and sometimes the best is pretty average, and that's okay. It's no one's fault, but it does become our responsibility, I believe, when we get older, and if we're still running our lives from that place, or maybe playing the victim of that stuff, or perhaps projecting it onto others or our children, I really believe it's then time to really address that, look inward, and take responsibility for that healing because no one's going to do it for you. And I think that's a challenging and tough pill to swallow sometimes because it is tough, right? Some people have grown up with really harsh parents that maybe didn't really give them anything of what they needed, and that's hard to take that responsibility and go, well, at the end of the day, like this is me now, and I'm not that child anymore. So I think that's where it starts to begin. Is like, okay, I'm ready to take responsibility for me, the way that I show up, where did this begin? Where did this weird, distorted thing that I do begin? And maybe who was around me at that time that created that funny, distorted behavior or pattern?
Yeah.
Or my last thing, sorry, Ruth, I could talk
Not at
about
all.
this for ages.
Please.
And I know, Michelle, you asked for a really short and precise version of this, but I can't give that to you. So, because I think it's so important to have like a full range and perspective and an idea of what this big picture
Yeah.
looks like, It could also just be like, maybe you watch your parents apologize a lot. I don't know. Like, where did you learn this behavior? Who knows? What were your parents like? Maybe the only way we could get love as children was to be perfect or to do the thing that we knew we'd get love for. So if your parents were very much about praising you for performance and doing a good job, but didn't give you anything when maybe you didn't do the best job, then that can also fuel that behavior of trying to please and trying to be perfect or apologizing all the time. Like, sorry I didn't win, sorry I didn't do enough, sorry, blah, 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 you know?
Yeah.
And then what's the last bit of this question?
So many layers.
So many.
So everything. So.
What
That
should I
was
look for?
That was pretty much it. Just not
Yeah.
100% sure what I should be looking for. That was the last
Okay.
thing.
Yes. So again, like I said, look to your childhood, perhaps to see what's there for you. But I would also say that sometimes it's really hard to do this work on your own as well. Initially, if you've never done any inner child work before, I would absolutely say find someone who is a professional in this space or who can support you and guide you more toward that inner part of you. And then from there, you can work with it more on your own and in your own terms and space.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, it was very detailed
Yes,
explanation.
it wasn't simple at all.
I just like to add to that too. Maybe it might help, Michelle, if like because I myself used to apologize all the time for everything, and when I grew up, I had a very um, my dad was quite harsh. He was a very harsh man. My mum could be, but not as much. She was way more loving and gentle with me. But yeah, I felt like I had to walk on eggshells around my dad because anything, like I felt like literally what she says, like I feel like if I was breathing too hard or something, like he'd be like, like just lose
Yeah.
his shit at me.
Yeah.
So I felt like I got, that need to apologize for just existing or
Mhm.
from
Mm.
that and from him
Yeah. Yeah.
primarily.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that helps Michelle at all, but I hope that does help you, Michelle, when you do listen. Yaz, I'd like to, you know how like pretty much every coach that I come across, every almost every kind of healer or whatever, like it's the people that I've come across, especially from my podcast and the interviews that I do, everyone's got this like story that
Mhm.
relates to why they're doing the work that they're doing today, like because we end up doing like having all these experiences that shape us, and then we get to a point to whenever that is in our lives where we're like, okay, you've just done a 180, but you've like integrated everything, and you're like, okay, like I know that I'm here to use my experiences to help others.
Mm.
What was that for you?
Oh Jesus, how long do we have? This is not a short podcast, Ruth.
Did I say it was a short podcast? I don't
Yeah,
know.
I don't think you ever did. Thank God. If you wanted a short one, it's not this episode. um, wow, there were so many defining moments. I feel, for me personally. Um, I think I would start from the beginning and say that when I grew up mostly with a single mother. My dad was around, but I mostly grew up with my mother. And my mum had a lot of trauma of her own. And I didn't know this at the time, obviously, as a child, but looking back now, I see it so clearly. And because of that trauma, the way that she showed up in the world was just, she was very activated and really depressed and really like emotionally unregulated. And that really affected me as a child. And for a long time, like, I was a kid walking on eggshells and being a kid, but then getting told off for everything about being a kid, making a mess, and suddenly that was the worst thing I could ever do. And it was really, I look at that and just see, just such a small capacity in the nervous system of my mother to handle life and to handle a child on top of that. And it wasn't a planned pregnancy, all of these things. So growing up was actually really fucking tough for me, I have to admit. And I remember going when I was like, I must have been like 5 or 6 years old. I remember this. And my mom would have like frequent breakdowns, like all the time. She would just have breakdowns where she'd either just like fall in a heap. And like as a child, you don't know what the fuck's going on. You're just like, this parent is meant to be my caregiver, but they're breaking down. Like, what does this mean? So I know that, throughout my whole childhood, I don't think I ever really felt safe or settled. And I think that showed because I never slept as a kid. My mom would always say, like, I never slept. I was never settled. I was always quite anxious as a kid, very like always doing things, always being busy, and always very tuned out, which is another sign of being in a traumatic household is tuning out a lot. I was always in a daydream, basically not on this planet, as a coping strategy. And I think that like experience for me growing up with that really did shape um, the work that I do now. I think, like, of course, it started with me wanting to figure out what the fuck went on in my life to make me the way I was, and how to heal from that. And I remember I was actually a PT at the time. I'd finished school. I felt so overwhelmed with everything. I'd had like a really, again, my child was so bumpy that by the time I finished school, I think I was just fucking exhausted. And I was like, man, I don't even have the capacity, the energy to go to uni right now. Like, I'm just getting by here. Like, and I remember, especially in my last year of school, having a lot of suicidal thoughts and being like, maybe like I was getting kicked out of home a lot. I was becoming more rebellious. I was pushing back a little bit more. My mum was quite aggressive, and I started to kind of push back to that. I guess when you get to a teenage, you start going, now fuck this and fuck everyone, and this is not okay, and trying to stand up for myself. And so I was often kicked out of home, and I was living with my auntie at the time. And I remember at this point, I was just like in a really low space. It was in my final year of school, was when I needed to be my most like on. And I was just like, what would it be like if I killed myself? myself. And I remember like giving that a few thoughts. I don't think I could ever do it, but it crossed my mind a lot at that time. And then finishing school, leaving school, I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I just decided to get a full time job. I started going to the gym around the end of high school. And I kind of just fell in love with this exercise thing. Like I wasn't actually a sporty kid growing up. I didn't really like exercise. I hated going for walks. Like all my parents can tell me that like every time I try to go for a walk with me as a kid, I was like, I don't want to go. Like I hate walking. So going to the gym was like such a surprise for everyone in the family. And yeah, I just fell in love with it. I think it was the routine and it just gave me this feeling of solidarity in my life and like I could do something and achieve something. So I kind of went down that track. It was also probably a little bit like externally driven of like I want to look really good because again at that point I had really low self esteem. So I was like, if I look good, like I'll be enough. So that was also a little bit of that shadow um, motivation. And then through that sort of journey, like I started competing. I did some bodybuilding. I really loved it. I loved the sport. I loved the discipline. And it gave me a lot of structure and like that safety and certainty I think that you crave. So I kind of went through this journey and was like, I want to help people get fit because this felt good for me. So what if I can give that to someone else? I think that's always like the hero journey, right? You do it and you go on the journey and then you finish and you're like, I'm going to take back the wisdom to everyone else. And so I became a PT. And I loved that. I really did. And then there was a point where I started to kind of get over it. You know, I'd done it for 4 years. And by the end of my stint as being a PT, I kind of just went, I'm kind of getting over this. I'm realizing that there's a lot more to humans than just their body. And this is when I started to go on my own self healing journey. And yeah, I just started to become very curious of why are people getting good results with their body, but they're still miserable? What makes people happy? What makes people unhappy? Like, what is this whole mindset thing? Like, all of that was coming up. And around the same time, my best friend of 19 years committed suicide. And so again, like there was all these little points of being like, what is it that makes people want to do this? Like, what is it that made people feel like they couldn't overcome what was going on for them? Like all of these things started to make me so curious. And also like on another level, I didn't know how to support people in that space. Like, you know, at the core of it, I wanted to know how to support people that were going through hard things because I think a big thing that I carried for a long time was this guilt. I felt like I wasn't there for my best friend. I felt like I didn't know how to support her. I knew she wasn't okay, but I just didn't know how to support her or help her or make her feel better. I just didn't know. And same with my mum. Like I didn't know how to support her either. Not that that was my job, but again, like all of these things were really fitting into place for me at that time. And so I went on my own kind of healing journey where I remember enrolling in an NLP course and I had this chat with this guy and Paul, the owner, he was saying like, why do you want to do this course? And I was like, well, you know, like I really want to know how to help people. And I think, you know, a lot of the time when we want to help people, we also are desperate to help ourselves. But it's somehow more like socially accepted to want to help others. You know, I think there's that real funny dynamic that goes on with healers and helpers, like kind of that wounded healer thing, right? And he goes, okay, I love that, but he's like, why? What do you want for you? Like, what do you want to get out of it for yourself? And I was like, oh, this is a rocky question for me right now, Paul. And I remember breaking down on the phone and just being like, my life's a mess. Like, I don't know how to love myself. I don't love myself. I don't know how to forgive my mother. I'm struggling. Like, I don't know how to do this shit. This is tough. Like, emotions and mindset and all this. Like, I don't know. And he was like, oh, I think you're going to be perfect for this. So, you know, I went to this course and, you know, it changed my life. That course, like, it was 7 days of full on, like, you were there from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. every night, every day. And then you were doing study at home and practicing at home and doing all this stuff. And like all of it was getting therapized yourself really through the practical. And there were so many light bulb moments for me in that it just changed the way that I viewed my life. It changed my perception. I think a lot of people, when they're on this journey, need that perception change to begin with. Like you need to know that you're actually in control of your life and that you're the creator of the reality. When I heard that, I was like, wait, I'm creating this? Like, what? I have control. Like, this is me and I'm putting this into my world. And wait, it's a little fucked up right now. Are you saying that's me? Like, is that a little bit of me right now? And like, yeah, it was really that beautiful invitation to take responsibility. And it was so powerful. It really did take me from being a victim in my life to starting to become more of that, um, empowered human who was realizing that they were sovereign and actually the creator. And I was actually behind the wheel the whole time, even though I thought I was in the back seat of that car. So for me, it was like, oh my God, like paradigm shifting, earth shattering. Because here I was thinking, like, I'm so broken, like it's gonna take me forever to heal this, and all of that. And yeah, it really changed a lot for me. So I think from that point, it put the wheels in motion, and a lot of my journey has then been again about how can I better myself, how can I heal more of myself, how can I do this journey for me first, and then again, yeah, going through that journey, what can I then offer someone else? So I did start being more of a mindset coach after that point. I did my master's in it. I just loved NLP so much after that one experience. I was like, I've got to go back and do it more. Like, I want to master this. So I was so enthusiastic, and it gave me this hope and this like inspiration that even like it doesn't matter what you've been through, you can get through this, and you can become the creator, and you can create something beautiful and special for your life. So that's sort of what I went into. And then again, going through that journey, it led me into more about trauma and the inner child and breath work. And I worked with a lot of mentors who were in that space and taught me a lot about all of those deeper things that I had no idea about. And again, like that shifted so much for me internally that I was like, I just can't help but share this with others, because again, at that time, like that was 5 years ago now, a lot of that stuff wasn't very known. Like, it's a lot more well known now, but it was not very talked about. No one really knew about fuck trauma and the inner child. Like, that was so new back then. So yeah, I think like all of us, we have that beautiful breakthrough and go, oh man, I need to help. I need to share this with others. Like, it feels like my duty to share this with others. So
So
yeah.
true. So true. Thank you for sharing. We have a very similar background, apparently, with the whole PT thing.
But you were PT as well.
Yeah, I was a PT.
What?
Yeah,
Really?
for like 7 years, and then
Oh my
that's
God.
when I was like, no, I need. There's more.
There's
I
more.
want to still help people, but it's so much deeper than this. Like,
Yes. Yes.
um, so yeah, very similar, very cool. Uh, I didn't realize you had NLP training. My was a third last interview was. Have you heard of Michelle Masters?
No.
Oh, she's
That
a
rings a bell, but not it doesn't come to mind.
yeah. She she's an American lady, and she's done. She focuses on. Well, she's got written a book on money, like money magic.
Yeah.
She's been doing NLP for like 25 years.
Wow.
And I actually had a session with her like a few months back, and it was just like, it just, that was, I've done so much different healing like on myself this past year with
Mm.
just people coming into my
Mhm.
consciousness,
Mhm.
and I'm
Mhm.
just going, yep, I'll do a bit of you, yep, I'll do a bit of you.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and I've just been doing that, right? And she was one
Sampling.
of them. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And
Wow.
she was one of them, and definitely what I did with her shifted some serious stuff in me, which was awesome. And then I was like, I need to get this woman onto my podcast, and I interviewed her. The interview just came out like this week,
Mm.
but it was like we hardly talked about NLP. We went like other dimensional. It was mind blowing. It was
Oh
amazing,
my God, I love that. I can't wait to listen to that now.
but. um, but yeah, oh, I had a question straight over. It was related to what you were talking about, but I've lost it now. So just gonna ask you something else, which is cool. Um, what do you think for you was your biggest lesson? I mean, I know you've talked about lots of lessons just then that
Mm.
you've had, but what was probably the biggest thing for you that changed your life? and I know there are many, but what's the thing that sticks out most for you?
Wow. Um, that's such a tough question because I'm like,
Is
how do
it?
I
I
narrow
thought
this?
you'd
How
have
do I?
so many to choose from.
I
Okay.
mean, I think that's what I'm like. Oh, I've got choice
That's why it's
anxiety.
tough.
There's so many.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, you know what's funny? Actually, I want to, if I may, just like enter with like a little bit of a riff here about this whole topic.
You may.
Um, for a long time, and I think this really ties into everything, for a long time, there was a pinnacle moment that really stood out for me as a big lesson, even though it wasn't really a lesson, but it was an experience that really taught me a lot, um, and really made me be more introspective. But since that point, so much has happened that that no longer feels like the biggest lesson, even though that was probably the biggest event I've been through. It's not my biggest lesson anymore. And I think, you know what, the biggest lesson to date actually now is that, and this was a tough one. This was a tough one. I think it's tough for a lot of people. The toughest one was actually realizing um, that you know, I guess that, you know, boundaries that you keep are not just for you and friends and people and clients and all of that, but it's actually really for you and your parents as well. And really implementing new boundaries, especially with my mum, which has been a real journey for me because there have been a lot of weird attachment styles in that relationship and a lot of codependency traits in there. And for me, like the biggest healing of that codependence was actually finally just saying no and putting in some really massive, tough boundaries that were healthy, regardless of the reaction or the pushback or whatever, and staying in that space and being in that discomfort, knowing that whatever rises in me is just a part of that old conditioning leaving. um that's been the biggest lesson right now. Like my biggest teacher right now has been that, you know. And I've been on many journeys with my mum and a lot of healing has taken place, but there's new layers coming up right now. And for me, it's like having the real boundaries in place where you stand so strong in those. And like, man, that's tough. Like I'm learning even with my closest friends, like these new boundaries coming up, I'm like, these are really tough boundaries. And they're not necessarily fucking comfortable, I will admit. Like some of these boundaries I wanted to throw up making, you know, because there's all this other shit that's involved, but you realize, you know, those healthy relationships occur because you're co-creating that experience with each other. And if you're not taking the responsibility within yourself to uphold that version of the relationship that you want by virtue of holding boundaries, speaking your truth, all of those things, then you're still very much enabling and buying into those old codependent ways of relating. And that's just not where I'm at anymore. So for me, those have been the biggest lessons, is that, yeah, just the new level of self responsibility. And again, really playing into the narrative that if we're co-creating and we're creating this existence, then of course we're fucking 100% responsible for the way we show up in our relationships, no matter if they're with family or if they're with friends or with acquaintances. I feel like those boundaries actually need to be the same. It's not because we get this whole thing. For me, it was like, oh, but she's your mom, or oh, but it's your dad, or oh, but it's your family. And I don't think family get a fucking discount to your well-being. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's this
Absolutely.
real conditioning in this society about like it's okay to suffer at the hands of your family because they're your family, and you know what? They're allowed to traumatize you, and you're allowed to enable it, which I think is bullshit. To be fair, that's my view. Take it or leave it, but yeah, I'm really starting to realize that your boundaries are the same across everywhere.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that. Um, yeah, just especially lately. I think my dad passed away a couple of years ago, but my mum,
Mm,
um, I've had like a really estranged relationship with both my parents, and then continuing on with my mum after my dad passed, and it was interesting. I don't think, because she lives in Spain, and you know, like I was making an effort and calling her every week because I felt
Mm.
like that was part of my
It's the
duty,
obligation thing, isn't
right?
it? That we all
Yeah,
wear. It's weird.
I know. Because she's your mother, right?
Yeah, she gave
That's the
birth to
thing.
you. You owe her for the
Yeah,
rest of your life.
I owe her, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's, you know, part of society's conditioning, and I think that I think people start to realize that maybe that's
Mm.
not the case.
Mm.
And I would have continued to have done that, but my mum did me the favor of cutting our relationship.
Wow.
But it was necessary and good
Yeah,
for me and good for her because we're on
yeah,
totally different planets.
yeah,
Totally different planets. So,
yeah.
um, if anything, I love her more now, you know?
It's
So
really beautiful. Yeah.
it's, you know, this whole thing that you were just talking about is, it's bullshit, you know? Like the fact that you
Yeah.
have to suffer at the hands of your parents, at the hands of your family because they're that's bullshit.
Yeah,
Don't.
I feel like there's no obligation to be at the mercy of people. Like, again, how disempowering is that to everyone in your family to run that like narrative and play through that pattern that they've
Mm,
probably lived in their families,
mm,
right? It's generational shit, let's be honest.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I think I don't know if you agree, but do you find that from that point, even your level of self love has risen so much because it's almost like, okay, I have to actually really step up as my own parent in this space. Like, how can I be my own mother? How can I mother myself? How can I father myself? How can I give myself what it is I need, what my inner child needs? Like, how can I nourish me instead of constantly playing into these distorted and toxic relationships to get a crumb of what it is that I'm craving?
Yeah, preach, man,
Do you
preach.
know what I'm saying?
Seriously,
Yeah,
seriously. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And it's so
Mm,
fucking empowering, so
mm,
empowering to just go,
mm,
oh, I don't need you. Like,
mm.
it would have been amazing to have an amazing relationship with you,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I didn't have that. And like, it's actually better now that I don't have
Mm,
to, you know, what's the word? Like, I don't have to cut my limb off to like make this thing work with you, you know?
yeah,
Like, that's what
yeah,
it felt
yeah,
like. I was just like
yeah.
neglecting a huge part of me just to
Mm,
make this shit
mm,
work. For what?
mm,
Because of society's rules?
mm.
Fuck that shit.
And I really believe that we have so many mothers and fathers in our lives that, that sprinkle um those roles. Like, I really look in my own life. I've had so many mothers in my journey. Like, I even do have a beautiful stepmother as well, who's also been a mother, but friends who've been like mother archetypes for me in those times where I needed it. So I think, like, we're mothered by so many people, we're fathered by so many people. And I think, yeah, like the role of one person, um, it's like, again, like, there's such an interesting dynamic with that of going, oh, but it's my father. But it's like, well, I think, yeah, we've got to look deeper than that now and go, well, what is this person adding to this relationship? What am I adding to this relationship? Is it reciprocal? Is it healthy? Does it feel good? Does it not feel good? Can I talk about this with them? Can we iron this out together? But if one party is not willing to go there with you, what do you do in that space? And I think for me, the door's always open for that relationship to change, evolve, heal, all of those things. But I'm no longer willing to go the full way, because I'm obliged to, or because I should. I think it's an even exchange that we're having with people now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, Ruth! Oh my goodness! Thank you for sharing that. Oh my
Yeah,
god.
that's cool, man. I honestly believe like we everyone has a story and everybody's
mm,
story can help at least one person out there. And
mm,
if me
mm,
being open about it, about my
mm.
personal journey can help someone,
Yeah,
that's my role
100%.
done, tick, you know? Like,
Love it. And if I may just add one more thing that's coming through, I think for me, the most healing thing for my inner child was actually to finally take full responsibility for my needs
Mm,
and stop victimizing myself at the hands of my parents or my mum and being that sad little girl who still doesn't have the love that she needs from whoever and go, but that's not their fault. And it's not actually their responsibility anymore because I'm a sovereign adult. And
yeah,
that's my job now, you know?
absolutely. Yeah. And you know, it's so liberating. It's
Mm.
such an amazing place to finally get to after years, lifetime of whatever, you
It's
know?
very sobering, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah,
Very sobering.
it is. It
It's
is.
really stepping out of that fantasy, I
Mm, yes. Oh my God, yes.
think.
Um, what do you think is going on in the world right now?
Oh my God. We allowed to
Going
say
from
this?
strength to strength here. Yeah.
This is such a deep podcast. I'm going to be in tears by the end of this, Ruth, and need some therapy. um, far out. Oh, so many things. um, look, I think there is, like most things, what we resist persists. Like, I think there is a big metaphor happening in the world right now. And there's also some really real things happening and some real action that needs to be taken from my perspective to change the course of where we may be going. But I do feel like um, there is a real mixture of people that are really, I've seen it, like more and more people at the moment are, waking up and taking responsibility. I think waking up really is about just realizing, oh my God, I'm responsible. I think there are so many amazing people right now that are looking inward and trying to heal and like taking responsibility and all of those things. And I really see that helping so much globally. And then on the flip side of that, I also see like the shadow aspect of humanity, which is I'm going to keep shoving this thing under the rug, but now it's getting so big that we're tripping over the rug. And there's a lot of flaws and cracks showing. And I think it's necessary. I think a lot of what's going on is necessary. I think there's a lot of um, deaths and destruction and things happening for a reason because, again, like our whole world is built on some really rocky grounds, morally, uh, economically, um, there's so many things at play that are really showing to be not they're not going to work. What's gotten us here won't get us there, that sort of thing, right? So I think there is a lot breaking down for the new to come through. And like any journey, it's not always fucking pretty. And it's not always smooth and it's not always rainbows and Disney. It can be pretty real and raw and rough. And I think that's kind of what we're going through right now. That's my view of it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of rough stuff.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
can people get a hold of you if they want to work with you?
Well, I'm sorry to say this, but I'm actually booked for 2021 because of my
Whoa.
other beautiful love child, Cacao Collective, who's taking center stage at the moment. But I do still offer a lot of free, beautiful content on my Instagram, which is Yasmin_Eve. So if you want to find me there, you're so welcome to join me, message me, ask me some questions, interact with the content that's coming out. I do like to keep that alive, so I'm not completely going off grid, but um, my work is really limited right now. So feels good and weird to say at the same time.
Yeah, no, good for you. That's it's obviously you're at a busy space where you're focusing on what makes you happy, and that's amazing.
Yeah,
I
and I have to
acknowledge it.
say, like, it's been a bit of an identity death in some ways because I've been coaching for five years now, 8 if you want to count, you know, PT as well, and that's taking more of a side seat while a product based business is coming through, which has got some beautiful missions and goals of its own to help humanity, but just in a very different way. And so, yeah, it's weird, but I love it, you know?
Do you want to tell us quickly about that?
Absolutely. So, Cacao Collective is a ceremonial cacao business, but really for the purpose of sharing this beautiful, like I call it plant medicine, it really is this beautiful plant medicine that is like extremely nutrient dense and full of incredible things into the world to support people in their days and open up their hearts and make them feel good, because there are so many beautiful active compounds that make you feel amazing. And it's just really changing the way people relate to chocolate and themselves, and stimulation. So it's a big, beautiful, love of mine. Personally helped me a lot in my journey, especially coming off coffee, because that was just not a good choice for me. As a quite, often anxious person, like that's changed now a lot drastically, but, I was heavily stimulated all the time on caffeine, which was just not doing wonders for my nervous system and making me extremely anxious and jittery and agitated and frustrated and like touchy. Coming off coffee was like the best thing I've ever done. But I think like I love the ritual of having a warm drink in the morning, and cacao has filled that spot so beautifully. It's delicious. It's chocolatey. I mean, who doesn't want to start their day with chocolate? Come on.
Right.
Hello. And it makes me feel amazing. And so again, like the same thing, you find something you love and you think has really added something to your life, and you're like, I have to share this. Like I feel like I must. So here I am. But I think, coming back to what we were talking about a little bit before, Ruth, today, before we jumped on, was this idea of like what spiritual looks like. And, there is a big community of beautiful spirit. Like I love spirituality and I love the woo-woo thing, right? But I also think spirituality has many different flavors and many different looks and many different genders and colors and everything, right? There's no really one archetype for it. And I did find that a lot of brands were very hyper spiritual and very kind of to that audience. And there was really nothing for the everyday person who maybe just wanted to add something special to their morning, or, that little 1% difference in their life. So for me and for us, we're a chocolate trio at Cacao Collective, but we really wanted to offer something that appealed to the everyday person as well, that felt inclusive and welcoming, that you didn't have to be in a certain club or be a type of person to enjoy it. It was like, it's available to you if you want it, basically. So, yeah.
So where can people get your delicious cacao?
So you can get it at www.cacaocollective.com.au. We do ship worldwide. It just might cost you a little bit at this point because we only have one facility in Australia. But you can use, I've got a little code for everyone who wants to use it. So if you use the code cacao10, you get a little discount, and that's all caps lock. So
amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
I have tried Yasmin's Cacao Collective cacao, and it is incredible. I have to say, I'm not just saying that because you're in front of me right now.
Give me a little plug, Ruth.
Yeah. No, I did really enjoy it. It was beautiful.
Thank you.
So yeah, go get yourself some, guys. Yasmin, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. You have been amazing. I love this conversation.
Thank you.
I hope
really nourishing.
You too. So thank you. Yeah.